Jewish Education in Media is pleased to present L'Chaim, a program that highlights the people, issues, and events of importance to the Jewish community. Now here is your host, Rabbi Mark Golub.
I'm Mark Golub, and not too long ago, people would never say out loud the word cancer. They'd whisper it. Sometimes it was referred to as the big C. It was too frightening because it almost always meant certain, if not imminent, death. Worse, people with cancer were often treated as lepers, shunned, excluded, set aside. It was as if it were an embarrassment to have cancer. And the reality of cancer is well known in the Jewish community, which is obsessed with health, good health. And it's staggering how many people each of us knows who's had cancer, whom we lost to cancer, and who have survived cancer. For thankfully, so much has changed in the treatment of cancer and in the way our society today views cancer and those dealing with cancer. There's been a revolution in the way people now view cancer and deal with it when someone in their family or when they themselves are diagnosed with cancer. It's still very scary to have cancer, any form of cancer. With many forms of cancer, not all, but with many, it is no longer a death sentence. People survive cancer. People are actually cured of cancer, become cancer-free. And people can live long, happy, productive lives after being diagnosed with cancer. And one of the individuals who's been in the forefront of the way our society now deals with the challenge of cancer is an extraordinary woman who virtually single-handedly created one of the most successful organizations addressing breast cancer, an organization known worldwide, Susan G. Komen. It is an honor to be joined at this table by Nancy Brinker, whose nonprofit organization, which, by the way, bears the name of Nancy's sister, Susan, who died of breast cancer at the age of 36. But the organization has invested more than $2.6 billion in groundbreaking research, community health outreach, and advocacy in more than 30 countries. And it's helped reduce death rates from breast cancer by 34% since 1990, and has helped improve 5-year survival rates for early stage cancers from 74% to 99%. By the way, in a separate sphere, Nancy Brinker has also had a most impressive resume in public service as the former U.S. ambassador to Hungary from 2001 to 2003, and she was the chief of protocol at the White House for the administration of George W. Bush from 2007 until his term concluded. Currently, Nancy serves as Goodwill Ambassador for Cancer Control for the World Health Organization, and in recognition of the extraordinary contribution Nancy has made to the world, President Obama presented her with our nation's highest civilian honor, the Presidential Medal of Freedom. Nancy, I have so much wanted you at this table. Thank you for joining us.
Well, thank you, Rabbi. Thank you, Mark, for asking me, and I'm delighted to be here.
So I first want to talk just about you, and I understand that it was this very close relationship you had to your sister Susan, which really prompted you to go in the direction you went. So I want to know just, a little bit about you and your sister and what your life was like growing up. Where did you grow up?
Well, we grew up in Peoria, Illinois, and funny, wasn't a very large Jewish community, maybe a couple hundred families at the most, not even that much probably. And our temple was a Baptist church, which we rented the facilities from. But you know, it didn't matter. We had a very special community, and we had a wonderful life. There were 4 of us in our family, and
Your mother and father's names?
Eleanor and Marvin Goodman, and my mother still is alive. My father passed away a few years ago. But they were the most wonderful parents, and Susie was my best friend growing up. She was 3 years older than I.
3 years older.
But wonderful, wonderful sister, just unbelievable.
What was she like?
She was beautiful and sunny and upbeat, and she was full of goodness. She was as beautiful on the inside as she was on the outside. She was sort of petite, and she had a great joy and a sense of humor, and she spent so much of her short years on earth helping other people. Mm-hmm. She really did. She loved serving, and she was invested in so many charities, and you know, she was young, and just everyone loved her.
Did she have a family?
She did. She had 2 children and a husband, and they were 6 and 10 when she died.
How are they doing now?
They're doing well. They're really doing well. The boy is over 40 now. And he has 2 darling little girls. One is named Susan Madeline Komen. The other is Abigail. Very cute girls and a wonderful wife. And then Susie's daughter, Stephanie, lives outside of Chicago. And then there's my son, Eric, who is doing really well as well.
Cousins, do they get along?
Right, very well.
That's
very
lovely.
well.
That's lovely. So where were you in life when you learned your sister has breast cancer? I
was living in Dallas, Texas, because that's where I went after graduating from the University of Illinois in 1968. And, you know, I was always lucky in the jobs and the mentors I gathered along the way. And one was a man named Stanley Marcus, who was the son of the founder of Neiman Marcus, and that's where I had an executive training program. It wasn't, you know, careers and endpoints for women weren't certainly what they weren't what they are today. Mm-hmm. So I was very excited to be put in a management program. I was fascinated with marketing, not so much the fashion and the clothing side, but the marketing, and getting to work close by Mr. Marcus was a huge opportunity for me. And also my father, who was a very hardworking, very smart businessman, and then later on my husband, who was also a builder of a very exciting company. So and I had many women who were mentors, but not that many early in my life, because not that many women were upwardly mobile then.
What did your father do?
My father was a real estate developer and a salesman before that. Mm-hmm.
Did he and your mother have a Jewish identity?
Yes. And my mother's family, particularly because they were from Peoria, my father's family was from the south side of Chicago, but mother came from a family of German immigrants, really. I mean, my great-grandfather came here in this country in 1896. And so she was a second-generation Jew, which was quite amazing. And my father was a second-generation Jew as well. His parents migrated here very from Russia and Lithuania. But mother's family really had the most influence on us in terms of our ancestors, because they were a very close family of 7 or 8 brothers and sisters, and an amazing tradition. And then that was our family business, the beginning of our family business.
In Peoria, you said it was a small Jewish community. Yeah. Did you go to the equivalent of a Sunday school or Hebrew school?
Yes, oh yes. And that's really, we had a wonderful rabbi, and you know, we were Reformed Jews, and so my depth of learning of Hebrew certainly isn't what I kind of wish it had been, but nonetheless we had a very good value-based religious training, and maybe one of the best parts of it was the tzedakah and the tikkun olam and the way we were rewarded for community service, and not really rewarded but praised for community service, and to understand that the world was ours to fix. And my mother was very strong about that. In fact, when we were little girls one day, we were in the back of her car complaining like crazy because she'd make us go with her every Saturday to serve one of her charities. And I was 5 and my sister was 8, and we were sitting in the back of this car, and it was hot and complaining up a storm. She pulled the car over to the side of the road and she said, "Girls, get out." Well, you know, this was a highway we were on, so we get out. We knew we were in big trouble. And she looked at us and she shook her finger and she said, "People have died serving our country. And all I'm asking you girls to do, I want you to fix what's wrong. and I want you to be stewards of what we do, and I want you to have good values and understand it's up to you to fix what's wrong. Now, we're not going anywhere unless you agree that you'll be a good steward and work hard all your life to give back. And so we sort of stood there, and finally my sister shoved me and said, say yes so we can go swimming. So we got in the car. I said, yes, Mom. I never understood what she was talking about when I was 5.
Exactly.
Until that night.
Yes, that night.
That night my sister came bounding in our bedroom and said, Nanny, I figured out how we're going to get to go swimming every week, and here's what we're going to do. We're going to have we're going to have a polio benefit show for our neighbors who have polio, and you're going to sing and dance, and I'm going to sell the tickets. And Mommy will see that we've been good neighbors. And, okay. Well, I was 5. I knew 2 Rosemary Clooney tunes.
Which were they?
You know, ba 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 chimmy baby, you know that one. And of course, I thought she was so talented. And anyway, I thought I was wonderful. I got up on the stage, and we had 64 neighbors, and we made $64 for the Polio Association. I came off the stage thinking I was just fabulous, and my sister looked at me, and she was always so kind, and she says, you know, Nan, I think next time I'll sing and dance, and you sell the tickets. So that's how I became a fundraiser, ultimately.
What a wonderful story. The story about your mother's extraordinary.
Yeah, yeah. Oh, Mother was...
You were very lucky.
I was so lucky. My mother, I can remember on every winter, and my father was very similar. They were very opposed to any kind of discrimination, segregation. And one day we were driving, well, Daddy would drive us to Florida every winter for our winter vacation. And we would play games in the car and do things. You know, we didn't have all the iPhones. And so one day we stopped at a gas station somewhere in Alabama or Georgia, one of those states, in Mississippi, I don't remember. And we got out, and I went to the restroom, and I saw colored on the restroom. And I started to go there, and my mother grabbed me by the hand, and she said, don't you ever walk in there, and if you see anyone else walking in there who may not look like you, I want you to take them by the hand and take them in the restroom we're going into, because that is not a nice way to treat people. And it was things like that that my mother did that were just, I mean, she was very strong about that. She was very just about her thinking. Mm-hmm. And
it influenced you, did it not?
Oh, tremendously. I mean, tremendously. Mm-hmm. And then she'd do another thing. She would, we weren't spoiled at all when we were young, and but every few months they maybe got us a sweater or something, or a pair of shoes. But her rule was, if you don't wear it within a few weeks, you're going to come home and it won't be there because someone else needs it more than you do. And that happened to us a few times, you know, and we understood what she said, if you ever tell a child that you see that they have your sweater on, you will be grounded for weeks. So, I mean, she was very strong about service, and she herself was an amazing leader in our community. She did wonderful things.
Like what?
Well, she built a Girl Scout camp with a man that, and she was sort of tasked with raising the money. That's before women were in the front rows of doing that. Her mother helped start, I understand, the sort of auxiliary group of the Red Cross during the war. Her mother was even stronger than she was. I never got to meet my grandmother because she died when she was 46, and of an infection from a kidney disease. And so, but that's how the whole family was. Mm-hmm. And they were generous.
Generations influenced generations.
Yeah. Yes, yes.
And again, I'll say, you were very lucky.
Oh, it was the greatest. You know, I know many children who've been born with far more than we had, because my father wasn't really successful until he was almost 60. He was very successful, but not in the way. And I know many children who inherited millions and millions and millions of dollars. And my parents, I always felt I inherited more. I always felt I inherited something far more valuable because I understood how service would make me happy.
That is lovely. You're in the small town of Peoria, in the small Jewish community. Did you have any extended family?
We did have extended family. Yes, we had some cousins and our children of our aunts and uncles.
So what was Seder like for you?
Seder was very interesting. And you know, it's very sad because we had this kind of large extended family. And, you know, someone would make the gefilte fish, someone would make the matzo ball soup, someone would do whatever. But we just had wonderful Seders and wonderful holidays. But equally as important to my parents was that we understood we were not living in a segregated world. So when my little friends would invite me to go to midnight mass at the Episcopal Church, I would go. When I was...
Your parents never said you can't go?
Oh, no, they encouraged me to go. They wanted us to understand other people's religions on purpose. And they wanted us to see the similarities that, while they may not be having the same holidays, we were a small number of people in a community that celebrated Christmas and not Hanukkah. And they wanted us to understand the basis of our religion, and which to Mother and Daddy was always hugely about service. It was about service and living our lives as we live them.
It's a theme that's coming through.
Yeah.
That really drove them. I want to come back now. My question was, where were you when you learned your sister has breast cancer?
I was in Dallas, and I was working away at my job. By then, I had left Neiman Marcus as I was doing a marketing job, which was wonderful, which is what I wanted to do, public relations and marketing. Anyway, I got a call one day, and Susie had been having some problems. She had some benign lumps in her breast and cysts and so forth like that. But this time was different, and she called, and she said, and I could tell from the tone in her voice, there was something different. And she told me that once again, she'd had this problem, and this time she really felt it was something dangerous. And so did the doctor. So I quickly got on a plane and flew to Peoria. When I got off the plane, my father was standing there, and I just saw it in his face. I knew. Now, we had seen breast cancer as little girls because we'd gone to visit my Aunt Rose in New York, and she had had a Halsted radical in her late 50s. She obviously had a more benign form of breast cancer than my sister did. But Susie had seen her one night when she was getting undressed, and it literally, I think, scared her to death. She looked like a ghost when she came back in the room we were staying in. And I said, "What's wrong?" She said, "Oh, I just saw the most horrible thing. Wait till you see Aunt Rose." Well, for me, I was in enough of a different generation. I thought she was the bravest, most beautiful woman I'd ever seen because she didn't miss a beat. She dressed beautifully. She had several husbands, and none of them, she was never divorced. They just all died. My father used to say they escaped. But anyway, she was a wonderful woman and full of life. So we saw it very differently. But I knew at that moment when Susie diagnosed, I thought about my aunt and I said, she's not going to do well with this. This is not going to go well. And it didn't. Mm-hmm.
How fast did it ravage her?
In 2.5 years, she was gone. And I came to find out many, many years later, because I developed breast cancer about 3 years after she died, that we had a particularly virulent form of the disease brought on by being BRCA positive, which happens to a lot of Ashkenazi Jewish women. But Susie's diagnosis was particularly difficult because I knew she wasn't going to do well with the surgery that she was going to have. I knew she wasn't going to do well because she wasn't bold about her treatment. And honestly, now that I know what I know, for a long time I blamed the doctors, I blamed everybody that treated her locally. It wasn't their fault. We knew so little about biology and breast cancer then that it was probably better she wasn't treated that way because it wouldn't have prolonged her life, really, the more we know today.
What year did she die? 1980?
1980. Yeah.
And by the way, on the one hand, 1980 doesn't sound so long ago.
Right.
But in terms of medicine, it's eons
Dark
ago.
Ages.
It is eons ago.
Yeah, and with cancer.
And at the time, they were doing the best they could.
Right.
But we know so much more now.
So much. They were scattered. They were shooting everyone with the same drugs, whether they were going to be drug resistant or not. They didn't know these things. And, of course, on some people they worked, and on many they didn't. And it was right before Susie died, about 6 weeks before she died, that she looked at me one day and said, "Nanny, I need you to help me make sure this never happens to other women." Because we'd talked a lot about it during sitting hours and hours. We'd finally gotten her to MD Anderson, which is a wonderful center, and they had one of the only breast clinics in the country. And we sat through measurable tests and therapies and things that nothing worked very much, and they tried everything. And so about 6 weeks before she died, maybe it was 4 weeks, she looked at me and she said, "I want you to help me make sure this never happens to other mothers again, that people never have to lose their children." And she used to say, "When I get better." She could never say, "When I die." She was so young, and I used to say, "I'm going to help you do this. We're going to do this together, and we're going to cure breast cancer." Mm-hmm.
I assume it was very painful for you to lose her.
I still have trouble today thinking of it because it is painful. You lose so much of your family or life. And, you know, sisters, when you're close to them, are often like second mothers. And she was so kind to me. I was not unlike her. I wasn't the pretty child. I was kind of plump. I was the working child. I was the one who kind of fixed everything, was told to fix whatever it was. And it was really painful for me because we never imagined a future where we wouldn't be together and where we wouldn't be taking care of our parents and we wouldn't be sharing each other's children. And we never imagined such a thing.
It also must have been very hard for you to see the pain that your parents experienced.
Oh, wow. And my father never could deal with it. He could never say. He would go, after she died, he would go to her graveside almost every day, as if somehow there would be a resurrection or something. I mean, it was like he was visiting her. He didn't feel good unless he went there every day. Mother was very strong, but still, she was with her so much of the time. And I can't even imagine what it would feel like to see your child, your oldest daughter, dying from something, and you can do nothing. And my father was the same way. My father was used to being Mr. Fix-It. He could do nothing, and it was so painful to watch that.
Mm-hmm. Yes, the feeling of helplessness is staggering.
Awful.
And in the Jewish tradition, it says the worst pain any human being can ever endure is losing a child.
Right.
There is a cycle to life, and everybody knows we will live and we will die, but we're not supposed to bury a child.
Right.
Ever.
Ever.
That's
right.
Okay, then one day you learn you have cancer.
Right.
I want to know what that was like for you.
Well, you know, I had started Susan Komen by then. We had a great group of volunteers and people working away. It was a small but very mighty organization because we were the only ones in the country doing it. There were other people doing some small groups.
And what's the it, Nancy? You were doing it. What's
building an organization that was meant to sustain and start to build more funding for science, more funding for treatment and screening. Remember, in those days, people didn't even know there was mammography. And people didn't even understand and couldn't say the word breast out loud. You couldn't print the word breast in most newspapers.
It's not only that you couldn't use the word cancer, you couldn't use the word breast.
You couldn't say breast on TV or radio or anywhere in public. We had to say women's cancers. And so it was very debilitating. Remember, we didn't have fax machines, we didn't have cell phones, we didn't have anything except that we had a telephone, thank God. And but the theory that going through this journey with Susie, I always believe there are no accidents. I could see every step of the way what was wrong. What was wrong was we had very little money for breast cancer in this country. We had declared the war on cancer in 1971. President Nixon did a wonderful job with that great bipartisan coalition around him. But still, we had very little money going to, organ-specific diseases, and some would say today, well, they're really not. They're biologic and genetic, and that's right too. But really, it was about cutting the stigma of this disease and getting people to understand they had it. There was treatment, there was screening, there were things they could do early. So that was our challenge. And so aside from no money research, no communication about it. There were no young patients talking to other young patients. There were no organizations dedicated to this. And the worst nightmare I had was seeing all these young women, and it was growing. The disease was growing when Susie was diagnosed. Maybe there were 1 out of 12 or 11 people. Now it's 1 out of 8 developing the disease and continuing. So if you throw in the worldwide, and still the growth of the disease in our country. So, it was a painful time, and I saw what needed to be done.
How did you do that? But I said to myself, if I were Nancy, where would I begin? Where did you begin? What was the first focus for you?
The first focus for me was that I realized somehow the only strength I had was the people I knew and that I understood marketing. At that time, I was so lucky that I had had the training I'd had. I understood communication and how to catch people's attention. In other words, I saw and read all the breast cancer and the cancer materials. They were so boring and so scary. First of all, people wouldn't talk about them because the treatment now was far worse, they thought, than the disease. So I thought, what can we do to give women hope? And I thought about the screening message, because when people saw there were mammogram machines and that this could detect a lump or at least focus them on it earlier, this was some hope. And I also thought that I was very smart. I thought I was so smart because we put a man on the moon, and I thought, okay, We have this big cancer institute in Washington. We have all this. How can this be so hard? And by the second day, I realized how dumb I was. I mean, I said, what, are you stupid? This is going to take a lifetime to do. There is so much we don't know. There's so many people not talking to each other. There were no 1-800 numbers for patients. There was no readily accessible information. People weren't talking to each other. And no one, of course, on TV, no public figures other than Betty Ford in 1974 when she developed her disease, really, people weren't talking about it.
How did the medical profession react to you?
Well, one of the very large cancer organizations, I went to them and asked them if we could create a breast cancer organization within their big umbrella.
Partnership.
And they said, no, it won't work. Okay. And then I went to several physicians who were kind of frightened by us because they thought we were sort of social creatures and we would get bored and we didn't understand how difficult the problem was because, remember, we were women mostly. So somehow we wouldn't understand. And we didn't have as many women physicians as we do today. Hardly any. I mean, it just wasn't, you know. But we had a lot of wonderful men who believed in us and a lot of people who did. One was my husband, who was so helpful, and he had a very successful business, which he grew in a franchise-like fashion. So I understood, and through all the research I did, I understood that we would have to have groups of people in many cities doing this event, doing these activities,
and
educating
you were prepared
people.
to create that network.
Yeah. I saw that there just wasn't one, and that
but you thought you could create.
Yeah, that I
network.
thought I could do a network, and I thought I could create organizations in these cities. I knew it had to be big. After we did our first event, which was in Dallas, Texas, a big luncheon event, and Mrs. Ford came, and I could see then the eyes and the hope on women's faces and the understanding that it was going to be okay to talk about this.
Forgive me. Can you help me understand how you take just the first major step?
So
it goes from an idea in your mind and in your heart.
Right.
All of a sudden it becomes a reality. How?
Right. Well, because before then, I was also involved in some of the Cancer Society's fundraising events when I was very young, from 21 to 19, and all this philanthropy, not even philanthropy, the service my parents had given. I understood how organizations worked and how important it was to inspire people and educate and reach out and make them aware. My mother did that all her life, and my dad supported that and did it as well. They were the first people in the gym supporting the polio vaccines, like that. My mother was a doer. And she used to say, you'll never get anything done sitting on your duff. So get up and do it. Even if you don't do it as well as somebody else, at least you'll do it. So that was my spirit. And I thought, we don't have time to waste. I'm not a rocket scientist, but I'm going to try to reach people and inspire them to help me.
Who do you call first?
I called the friends I had, and my wonderful husband, Norman, kind of allowed me to use the assets of our marriage, that is our house. He told me I didn't have to work. Then, and for a period of time.
So you could devote full time to this.
So I could devote full time to this. He helped us in many, many ways, and what he didn't know how he was helping us is our grocery budget was severely reduced. I mean, he would come home, and he was just such a wonderful guy, and he'd open the refrigerator, and there would be sort of chicken bones. There would be nothing in there, and he'd say, honey, are we having dinner tonight? And I said, I ran out of money, and I meant to ask you, I mean, how many times can you run out of money? I mean, how much did the chicken cost, you know? And
so you were not filthy rich here. You were not wealthy.
No, my husband was very wealthy. I wasn't, but he was very generous to me, but not necessarily writing big checks, but he let us use a small office within his corporate office. He let me use his, well, he didn't know he was going to let me use his network of friends. I asked him, he loved this idea because his first wife had died of ovarian cancer. Little Mo Connolly was his first wife, the tennis great. Anyway, he understood and had it in his heart, and he said, look, I think I support you in what you're doing, and you do need to create awareness. Women really, this disease is deadly, obviously. He said, but do me a favor. You know, I'm working hard on the company and getting investors and everything. Just don't call all my friends. Okay, and I said, I would never do that. So the next day I called all of his friends, and they all gave me, even if it was go-away money, I didn't care. If it was $200, if it was, I didn't care, whatever it was. And pretty soon we built up a little war chest of money. We had our first event. And one of his friends happened to know Mrs. Ford because he was politically involved with her, and he called her. And Betty, of course, became one of my best friends and mentors until she died. And she agreed to come to Dallas, Texas to help us with this event. And we named the Betty Ford Award for her, which we still give, by the way,
wonderful.
in a different form. And she was amazing in the way.
That does take it to a different level,
It
doesn't
does.
it?
It definitely took, we got some national media. But it wasn't just that. She really mentored me. She really mentored us. And she would say things like, and then when I developed my breast cancer a few years later.
Yes, we have to come back to that.
So, all right. So now we've been through the one big luncheon. We had 700 people turn out, which was amazing to me. And we raised some money. By the second year, we'd done an auction, an evening auction to augment that. We'd raised over $1 million. And then the third year, by 1983, we had decided, I had a dream one night. And I dreamed that I saw all these women running with like spears and pink shirts on, because my sister's favorite color was pink. And I always felt her with me. You know the story of Ruth. That was the story of my sister. I always felt that she went with me wherever I went. And of course you know the story of Ruth. Anyway, so I woke up and I said to myself, and woke up my husband, and I said, Norman, this is a race. It's a race for a cure. These women are racing. They're not walking. They're running, because they're desperate for treatment and knowledge and have their lives saved. And he said, okay, but what are you going to do about it? And I said, I don't know. I'm going to try to find, we found this wonderful advertising agency who did some pro bono work, and they donated to us the services, and we created Race for the Cure. And everybody begged me, because we'd had these few sort of high dollar events, don't screw up. You're going to drain all the assets of what we do by building this. Who's going to come to a race named and have breast cancer on their T-shirt? They don't even want to say it. You think they're going to come out and walk and run on a Saturday morning at 7 o'clock in the morning? You nuts? And I said, no, just let me do it one time. And 800 people came that year with their cats and dogs. And
you're the one who created the walk.
Yeah.
Amazing.
Yeah.
So it now is part of American life.
Yeah, it is, and it's been a wonderful.
Wow. And are you telling me that's where pink comes from?
Yeah, that's where the pink started.
Amazing.
Yeah. And we remember we had to do it city by city by city. We didn't have until about middle 80s fax machines and things like that we could use, and cell phones. But we did inspire people in different cities once they'd heard about it, because we were first with this kind of event. Everybody wanted to join in the race. They wanted to sign up. Where could they? And they understood the need. There was a movement starting. Mm-hmm. So
okay, now your story.
Okay, so
what's it like for you? You know, it's one thing to do this for your sister.
Yeah.
Now it's you.
Yeah. Well.
First of all, was it scary to you?
Yeah. Horrified, because
it is scary, isn't it?
Horrible. And I was terrified. I had married this wonderful man. I had this beautiful son, little boy. I was terrified that I was going to die the same way she did, and not finish my promise to her. This was a sacred promise.
How you discovered it?
In self-exam.
Okay.
Just innocently, I was in bed, and I went like this, and I felt this lump, and I thought, oh my God, and I almost jumped out of bed. The next day, thank God, my sister's physician team was sort of still intact in Houston and MD Anderson, but also I had very good, they were following me by then very closely, because once it happens to one sibling, they knew it was something genetic. They knew it wasn't just, but they didn't know what yet. The discoveries hadn't been made. I had a wonderful oncologist named George Blumenshine at MD Anderson who suspected it was a very aggressive disease. And so they treated me very aggressively immediately. And I was very lucky. I was very lucky. But the fear of it is still with me every day. I mean, you never feel you're cured. It's not but we know so much more about it now.
But this is now years and years and years, yes?
Yeah, 30 years. Mm-hmm. And I was terrified mostly that I wouldn't live to fulfill this promise. I really was. I made the sacred promise to her, and there was no going back. There was no one to go to and say, I'm sorry, I promised, Susie, but I can't, I'm dying and I can't do it. That wasn't going to be acceptable. So for me, it was a very scary time. And my husband was amazing. My mother was amazing.
Was about Norman here?
Yeah, and my mother was amazing. She sat with me every day when I was having treatment and would have to leave. And here she's now, her second daughter's going through it.
But her second daughter survives.
Yeah. Well, but we didn't know then.
No, we did not.
We don't know,
It must
so
have been very
it was
scary.
I don't know how she did it. I really don't.
I don't either, yes. I understand.
No.
Incidentally, what is your view? Because suddenly there's controversy over the mammogram.
Yeah.
What's your view of the mammogram?
You know what? Mammography's never been perfect. It's an old diagnostic a method of discovering some breast cancers early. With women with dense breasts, it doesn't work as well. We know that. This is a problem I had. And we know that much better screening, much more precise screening is on the way. It doesn't mean it hasn't served us, because it's 80% effective. And for many women with fatty tissue, you can spot very early in digital mammography today. There have been vast improvements. And I do think people should be screened. I do think so. But I think—
How often?
Well, again, it depends on your biology and your genetics.
There's no one prescription,
no one
is there?
prescription for everyone. But let me tell you what it will be like in the next few years, and this is why I'm so hopeful. I asked one of our scientific advisory board leaders, George Sledge from Stanford, what he thought. I said, George, tell me what it's going to be like in 3 or 4 years, maybe 5 years, for a woman with who might be developing breast cancer. He said, well, at that point, probably you'll have a chip inserted in your arm. You won't feel it or see it. It'll be tiny, with all of your DNA information, so that your DNA and your mutations can be read right away. And then we will have such specific blood work, or maybe a saliva test or something. We will see if there are just even 3 or 4 cells of a circulating tumor. And we will be treating this disease so early, and we will diagnose it so early, we will be able to develop a plan of treatment, which will be almost like a continuum over the period of your life, so that it will turn this disease into a pretty fully chronic, manageable disease.
Wouldn't that be just spectacular?
Honestly, it will be spectacular. 10 years ago, I would have told you I was very dispirited, 15 years ago, because in the 90s, we didn't have a lot of announcements of things.
And it didn't look like it was going well.
And it didn't look like it was going well. And I was very, very down about it. You know, this has been a long game. This is my 37th year of this. It's a long, long game. And I can't tell you how it feels to not be successful in something. We were successful in building the organization, but I had this creeping, awful feeling that we really
What would have defined success for you?
Well, where we are now, because now I can see the horizon. Mm-hmm. I see exactly where we're going.
And the horizon shows you?
And the horizon shows us that when we bring biology and technology together, we will have this manageable disease state. And in fact, in the fall, Susan Komen, along with 4 other great entities, the Robertson Foundation, the Rockefeller University, and Eric Weiner from Harvard, George Sledge from Stanford, all of the principals, we will have a big data conference toward breast cancer. And we will really start to analyze and look at the data that we've accrued for years and years and years, so we can have really precise medicine, precision medicine.
You're comfortable discussing all aspects of this, are you not?
Yes.
Okay. Mm. You know, you heard in my open, I talked about how people were scared to even say the word cancer.
Right.
Then you talk about the fact that when you first imagine the run, people don't want to use the word breast.
Right.
You can't say it on television, et cetera, et cetera. The reality is that breast cancer, because it's breast cancer, there's a sexual overtone to it. Mm-hmm. And how a woman decides to have breast cancer treated,
yeah.
And in some way, if she has a mastectomy or a double mastectomy, is this affecting her view of herself sexually? Speak to the psycho.
Well, I've had the same, over years, the same procedure, and a lot of surgery, to, you know, refashion myself and get myself back. I think the greatest thing is that, did I want this? No. Would I prefer not to have had my body rearranged? Yes. But to feel the elephant somewhat off of my back, because I was having to go in for mammography 6 months later, then an MRI 6 months later, and you never get through the screening process. You're always on edge. But it's more than that. It's that you really want to protect yourself. I hope in the future women never have to have this done. To have to remove perfectly healthy organs is a terrible decision a woman has to make. It just is. But it's a personal decision, and a woman ought to be able to make it without being criticized. So I was very supportive when Angelina Jolie, she did, you know, what a beautiful young woman like that, but you know, that was her choice. Maybe she felt she'd had her children, she wasn't going to have any more, she didn't want to have this problem in the future. Bravo to her to do what she felt she could live with. It doesn't mean every woman should do that.
What's your sense, because you're dealing with the people who are at the cutting edge of the attempt to find whatever the word cure means, but at least a way of controlling. What's your sense about cancer research in general? So many billions of dollars have been poured by ordinary people and by extraordinary foundations into cancer research. Where do you feel the world of fighting the cancer scourge? And we're learning more and more that cancer is a dysfunction of cells, and you're trying to, in very different ways, whether it's brain cancer or kidney, how to deal with how you stop cells from attacking cells, etc. Nancy, where are we?
We actually, if we'd had this conversation, as I said, 10 or 15 years ago, I took a very different view. I was a little bit, I didn't want to portray it to our organization and people who asked me the same question, but I felt dispirited. I will tell you today we're at the most exciting juncture that we've ever been. So when the war on cancer was declared in 1971, people came forward with resources. The nation turned itself upside down, if you remember. And we were going to take a man to the moon, and we were going to, or we had taken a man to the moon, and we were going to do the same thing with cancer. Because that's what we do in America. We always seem to respond to crisis and not necessarily understand the long, long game. So where we are today is we have all this elegant, gorgeous, amazing research and not enough money to fund it.
Is that true?
That's the sadness. Yeah.
We still need more money.
There's a 20%, the NIH budget was cut by 20% over the last 10 years. Now, it was doubled at the beginning of the decade, people would argue, but that's not it. Right now, the people suffering are the young scientists. The young, wonderful, brilliant scientists that have been built up through this amazing scientific medical complex, research complex known as the NIH and the NCI, the National Cancer Institute. Now these young scientists are being hired away by the Apples and the Googles and the pharma companies because they'll pay them well, and they can get them to apply their genius to solving their problems. We need them to apply their genius to solve the problems of cancer, and particularly bringing these two together, the technology and the biology that we know now today. We can speed up this process I'm talking about unbelievably.
Are you hopeful?
I'm very hopeful. I'm very hopeful, and I intend to be a part of it and intend to be outspoken about it.
Good for you. So, Nancy, we started by talking about what drove your parents and this Jewish sensitivity that you always have to be involved and you be committed and you're going to make it a better world. To what extent do you sometimes see in the work you've done with all of the work you've done in terms of breast cancer, a Jewish overlay?
Well, because for me personally, it's been about Tikkun Olam. It's been about trying very hard. It's been about tzedakah. It's been both. It's been the philanthropy side and doing what you need to do and creating a just world where people can live, address social barriers. For example, our community health programs, that's what we do. We address social barriers that people have to climb over. It's not that they can't get the treatment today, it's that they have to climb over these enormous barriers. Childcare, transportation, maybe somebody in their home isn't being good to them, maybe they can't get to the clinic, maybe they don't understand the language when they get to the clinic. So those are the things we deal with on the sort of justice side. But on the research side, which I am almost singly and wholly focused on today, because we can't even get to the social justice side until we know how to treat this disease cost effectively and make it accessible to everyone. This is going to be a very important, major milestone in our lives and our fight against a disease that really is the mother of all diseases. I mean, it is a tough, tough disease. And unless we can get our hands around it, our lives will continue to be shortened by this disease.
Mm-hmm. So you're being watched now by hundreds of thousands of both Jews and non-Jews. What's interesting is there is a Jewish component to breast cancer. You mentioned, incidentally, the BRCA positive.
Right.
What is that?
Well, it's a gene. It's a genetic mutation, which is very predictive of a woman developing the disease.
And it's prevalent in Ashkenazic women?
Yes, yes. In fact, 1 in 40 of Ashkenazic descent will develop breast cancer. It's very brisk.
Can it be diagnosed?
Yes, it can. I mean, there is a genetic test, which for a long time was very, very expensive. It's not going to be expensive going forward. In fact, one of my great friends, Mary Claire King, who was very, very instrumental in developing the BRCA mutation and explaining it to all of us, was that you know, she now has put forward that this test should be done on all women at risk for breast cancer because all of them should be done.
Why not?
Why not? I don't know.
Okay.
I don't know.
And what you're saying, if you find you do have this gene,
then it doesn't mean...
Is there a treatment?
Yeah, it doesn't mean you'll necessarily develop the disease, but the incidence goes way up. It means you being very watchful, and yes, there is treatment. It depends on what the actual tumor looks like at point of diagnosis.
But this is before tumor.
Yeah.
If you know you have this gene,
mutation,
all it means is be careful and watch out more.
Watchful. Be very watchful.
It's not like there's something you can do.
That's right. And many women don't develop a disease with it because we know there are other proteins in a person's body and their individual makeup that may, you know, shut it down, may interfere. But we do know people are highly predictive for the disease who are BRCA positive.
Okay. So take one moment for me. I want you to talk directly to the audience. What would you like women to know about breast cancer and how they should, what their strategy should be?
First of all, if you have a breast cancer, suspect you do, or you want to learn about it, and this is not self-promotion, I think you should go to Komen, KOMEN.org. We have one of the best websites in the world with as much information as can possibly be put in a website. The experience of patients, sources, who treats it well, where do you go, what questions do you ask, and if you are diagnosed, what you should do. But I think the other thing you need to know is that we need the help of every woman, every family in America to make the dream real about turning breast cancer into a manageable disease. It's very close at hand, but we're going to need lots of money and lots of resources and a lot of strength, will, to get to the last lap in this race for the cure. And we all need to walk hand in hand and do it. We need to collaborate. We all need to fund scientists, young scientists today to get to this point. And make no mistake, it won't happen unless we do. And I know we can do it because I'm optimistic, and I think in America all things are possible. And I'm lucky enough to have had a religion where I believe that the more you serve, the more you can serve.
Mm-hmm. And I want to say it again. If there is early detection, there's a 99% success rate that a woman can live in some way cancer-free.
Right. And it's, I don't mean to be misleading, it is if your cancer is diagnosed very early. And the conundrum comes in is that some women have cancers developing that we can't yet detect. That's the problem. But by and large, we have cut the death rate from this disease, even with metastatic disease, dramatically since 1990.
Even with metastatic?
Yeah,
that's right.
1990. We have people, survivors who are living 10 years or longer than I mean, we could never talk about young women with metastatic disease because there weren't any living, or very few living. My sister lived 2 years, and certainly didn't have the quality of life that these young women are having today. So I just pray every day that we can give them more of that.
Okay. Before I have to end with you, Nancy, how in the world do you become ambassador to Hungary? Where's that in the story?
Well, it was my wish and my desire, as it always is, to serve my country. I was so lucky to be close to a president and his wife, Laura Bush, and President George W. Bush.
Because of Texas?
And not even because of that, because our families were friends for years and years. My husband in 1962 did one of the first events for George Herbert Walker Bush in Dallas, when no one believed in him that he would. They all thought, you know, John Connally was going to win, was another wonderful man. But anyway, and it wasn't just through that I got to know the president's parents, but I got to know the Bushes, the younger Bushes, really through living in Dallas. And Laura and I became friends. She addressed all of the invitations for our first luncheon event. That's the kind of woman Laura is. And the president has always been supportive. He was a two-term governor, and they did things to help us. But more than that, I had the chance to serve after he was elected, and I was asked if I'd go overseas. And
what was that like
hard
for you?
Me. Well, it was amazing, except I was leaving on 9/11. The day I was posted to leave was 9/11.
No.
Yes. And so it was a bit of a nightmare the first couple of days. I was scared. My parents were afraid because of the history of Hungary, and they were afraid. And I decided I was going to go there as a Jewish woman, as a woman.
Jewish woman?
Yeah.
You're a Jewish ambassador from the United States to Hungary?
Yeah. Well, we had one before. We've had others, but I was the first woman Jewish ambassador, and I was going to go, and I was going to I was somehow going to turn this into a positive, and I think it did. I think we had.
Do you feel it was a successful tour?
I felt it was very successful. At the time, there were people kind of mad at me because I am outspoken, and I had to say things on behalf of our government that, you know, maybe I wouldn't have said just exactly at that moment, but I was pleased to do it and to represent my country and our president, and particularly right after 9/11. And they've been a very good ally by and large, and were very supportive of us at that time. So I was very lucky to be there.
Kolakavo to you. Good for you. Then you are chief of protocol at the White House?
That was funny. It was a fabulous, well, you know, once you're serving as an ambassador in another country, you understand what ambassadors do, what you need to do. So it was really the flip side, because you're also responsible for the lives and entry and credentialing of all the foreign ambassadors who serve in Washington. So I had an opportunity to play to the strengths that I had developed being overseas and understanding what they were doing and going through. And then you get travel with the president. It's actually a broad job. It has a broad mandate, and I was able to do things in that job that maybe I wouldn't have been able to do in almost anything.
Did you love it?
I loved it. I had the most wonderful, for me it was like a massive sabbatical in my life. I've only been away from Susan Komen for 4 years. And they were, both during those times, I was able to serve the cause, but I had to be careful because you're not supposed to serve another cause other than the U.S. government. But I was able to enrich and develop my understanding, my global understanding.
Okay, I have one general question. This is not about any specific administration. This is not a partisan political question. My question for you, you have been inside government. You know how it works. There is a popular notion that while we want to believe everybody in government is the smartest, the most well-educated, the most well-informed, and they're the brightest in being able to formulate policy and then execute policy. There's also a fear at times that the halls of government are populated just with people, and some are really bright and some are not, and they don't know nearly as much as we want to imagine and that in some way the fact that we get from here to there is astounding, sometimes by accident, sometimes by inertia. So I understand there's a loyalty you have to the Bush family. So I'm not asking about the Bush family. I am asking you, when you talk to people in confidence, what's your sense of the level of competence inside the halls of government?
Well, I will tell you, I was astounded by the level of competence. I was surrounded by President Bush put together an amazing team of people, but I've served other administrations, all of them since Ronald Reagan's time. I was privileged to be able to always represent the cancer cause on a panel or in a role, President's Cancer Panel, many things that I did in successive administrations that were all, and I was amazed by all of them, because my experience is once people get through the political process and they get into the governing mode, they really try to do the best they can. Now, sometimes they don't take advice from people they should, but you know, they try, and they try to do the best they can, and they by and large appoint some very smart people. It's not easy to serve in our government all the time. I mean, you have to give up practically all your worldly goods. You have, well, the amount of scrutiny today pushes more people away. You know, you've got social media, which some of these people on social media won't declare who they are, and they feel they have the right to literally undress you in public in nasty, nasty ways, and they don't even have to have any evidence or any background to say what they're saying, nothing. And so it's difficult for people to be ripped apart like that, who are doing something else. But if we don't have the best and the brightest serving in our government, we lose. We have still the most powerful country. People will say, well, China's our, maybe, but we still have the most respected, powerful country in the world. Not just powerful, but generous, philanthropic country. And we need to lead and own up to who we are and be good. And I do believe that most people serving in government are good people and very bright people. And there are some that maybe I would have replaced or thought they were. But you know what? That's sort of life, isn't it? Not everybody can be an A student, and not everybody's going to be the best and the brightest all the time. The important thing is that they're capable of putting aside their own sort of enhancing activities and join a team that is running the best country in the world.
You are the best.
Thank you.
How lucky we are to have you and the contribution you've made on so many levels.
Thank you.
What you do with Susan G. Komen is out of this world. And it has been an honor to sit with you. In Hebrew, we say, Kol tu v'hatzlacha, may you only have goodness and success in everything, especially in the work you're doing. All success to you. And I hope there are other times I get to sit with you. Thank you. Thank you, Nancy, very, very much.
Thank you.
Nancy Brinker, founder and chair of the nonprofit organization Susan G. Komen, dedicated to helping women survive breast cancer and breast cancer research and education, screening, treatment. I hope you enjoyed meeting Nancy and learning from her and her story and her insights. As always, I invite you to be in touch with me with any thoughts or comments you may have to anything you heard on this edition of L'Chaim. Please email me, write me, post on our Facebook wall, tweet me. I look forward to hearing from many of you. Until the next time, I'm Mark Golub. L'Chaim, my friends, to life.
L'Chaim is a presentation of Jewish education in media.
We would be pleased to send a complimentary DVD of this program to anyone who wishes to support JBS, the Jewish Broadcasting Service, with a tax-deductible gift of $36, double chai or more, to the nonprofit organization Jewish Education in Media. Simply visit the JBS homepage and click on the Donate button to make a donation by PayPal or your credit card. And please indicate the program for which you would like a DVD. Or you can send your tax-deductible check made out to Jem, Post Office Box 180, Riverdale Station, Bronx, New York 10471. And again, please remember to indicate which program you would like to receive with our compliments. And we thank you for your kind support.